Decoding Skills Development Legislation with your host, Darren Vandenberg. Hi, and welcome to another discussion around the legislation review. We are busy unpacking the QCTO, Policy for Implementation of RPL. Today's discussion is point 9, the language of assessment. Woo. Me and my wife both speak English, but we don't always speak the same language. Isn't that the truth? Okay, so language assessment. This is what the QCTO talks about in language assessment. In order to address issues of social justice, RPL may target candidates who may not be fluent in mainstream language. There are occupations that do not need one to be fluent in the mainstream language. This would necessitate support of the candidates in a familiar language. So please, it's very important. Mainstream language does not demonstrate your skill unless you want to do editing or write articles for mainstream media. Okay? But in general, in other contexts, it's not important whether you speak the language or not. If the job doesn't require you to speak the language of mainstream, why would you force a learner or an employee to have that? In South Africa, in the mines, we have a language called Funny Galore. It's just a mix of English and Afrikaans and native languages, and it's a great language. Everyone in the mine, well, not everyone, but people speak it in the mines as understanding. So why would I then do an English assessment on if someone can speak English? It makes no sense. How good is your assessment strategy? Again, because translations are not always difficult and not always expensive. Demonstration of skill is demonstration of skill. I want to see if you can serve a customer a cup of coffee. I want to see if you can drive a forklift. Easy. Demonstration of skill. So this is really saying that you may not discriminate against a person because of their language if the context of the RPL or the assessment doesn't require the language. Now, there's 3 points. It talks about the aim is to ensure that RPL candidates are not disadvantaged from enrolling for RPL because they're unable to express their knowledge and skills in mainstream language. They are assisted by translators and interpreters where necessary, and portfolios are translated, transcribed, or professionally presented as possible. So, the first two makes a lot of sense. They may not be discriminated. If you want to drive a forklift, I'll bring in the captain or the supervisor who speaks your language and tells you to drive a forklift. Video you driving the forklift. Make sure they tick all the boxes and follow all the signs. Do not lower the standard of your assessment criteria that you would train someone on if you were doing live training. That's why the assessment criteria for RPL and training is exactly the same. The only thing you might do is explain it to the learner in a different language. Here's a tip. If the supervisor is explaining to the learner what the assessment criteria is in a different language, video it. There you go. You've got it in video, and you can provide that video in that language to every other learner that requires it. You've just saved yourself thousands of monies in translations, and you've been able to broaden your RPL initiative, your assessment initiative. So the last discussion, or part of the discussion, is the aim is to ensure that candidates' portfolios are translated, transcribed, and professionally presented as possible. So it is a common challenge that portfolios are not well built, they're difficult to build, they're not well defined, and the key purpose of this is the training provider in and of itself doesn't actually know what needs to go into the portfolio. So they've used the assessment criteria, which says, for example, demonstrate that you can serve a table, demonstrate you can drive a forklift. But they go, okay, so let's write a question. Tell me, learner, how would you drive a forklift? And then they expect the learner to write in Queen's English how they would drive a forklift. The assessment criteria has to be looked at differently. And in order for the portfolio to be valuable, the artifact required needs to be well defined. So, i.e., get into a forklift, turn it on and drive it in relation to the standards. Go up to a customer, take their drinks order, write it on your pad, say thank you, and go put it into a till of some kind. Now, that's very kind of high level, but in essence, that's what we're looking for here. If the portfolios can be recreated or reviewed as in terms of create a video, do a verbal voice note, as opposed to just writing everything out, we'll have a very, very different output, and therefore portfolios will be easier to review. So the translation no longer needs to be from English, or in this case it talks about the mainstream language into the accepted language. By virtue of the learner creating a portfolio and then loading that into a digital POE folder, an ePOE folder, if the assessor who is supposed to be assessing the learner does not understand the language, it's quite simple. You bring in a third-party assessor to assist with the assessment. That there pretty much solves the whole language of assessment challenge. Thank you.